Your Mind YouTube live session. I'm excited to have a friend, somebody I met about a year ago, doing some great work. Anthony Ranaudo. He, former professional baseball player, currently, and I would call him a serial entrepreneur. Got his hands in a lot of different things, to include F45 and a lot of other projects. I can't wait to get into it with you. Thanks for
Yeah,
joining me here today.
no problem. It was only right. You came on my podcast, and I'm very grateful. We've had some really good conversations over the past year after we met, so it's an honor, man.
Yeah,
I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
yeah, yeah. So tell us a little bit about yourself. I brought up, obviously you're a pro ball player, had a very successful college career, um, and now getting into being an entrepreneur and starting different businesses and different ventures. Tell us a little bit about those projects and then maybe a little bit about your past. Yeah, what brought you to these new projects?
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess I could start with I've always been a baseball player and an athlete by trade. I was played baseball and basketball growing up. Took a scholarship to LSU. Ended up down in Louisiana at Louisiana State University and played baseball down there for 3 years. Won a national championship, and then was fortunate enough to get drafted and played professional baseball for 7 or 8 years with the Red Sox, the Rangers, and the White Sox. And then I even went across seas and played in the Korean baseball organization for a year. I sold out and took a good contract over there. I was getting kind of older, so I just tried to make a little bit of money
Yeah,
at the end of my career.
yeah,
But it helped
that's
me set
okay.
me up for a lot of things. Yeah, it helped me set me up for a lot of these different ventures that I'm working on now. And like you said, my most recent one, and probably the one that I'm the most passionate about currently, is my F45 franchise here. I know that's kind of
Yeah,
where we met originally, out in San Antonio,
yeah,
and so we opened up our studio here in March, and then obviously COVID hit. So we had a 2 week opening. We were lucky that we at least we opened, and then we had to sit out a few months, but now we're back in it and we're doing that. I'm part of a creative services company that specializes in creating content for brands and athletes around sports and sports business. I've made a few investments into Marucci Sports, Diamond Nation, which is a training facility up in New Jersey, training baseball and
okay.
softball facility. And like I said, Marucci Sports, which just recently sold. Um, did we lose you? Oh, sorry. I had a phone call coming in. I'm sorry about that. But
Okay.
just recently sold Marucci Sports, so we made a nice exit on that. That was a good investment for me. And then my day to day just kind of operates in the human performance, psychology, and I'm into breath work and different things and how that applies to human experience, human performance, and all those types of things. So I demand a lot out of my body and the people that I work with, and I appreciate a good mindset and the power of the mind and stuff like that. So it was right up my alley, that you asked me up on this show.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, right from the get go when we first met, the uh, our connection was really about mindset and psychology. So we definitely we connect quickly on all those topics. So I'm excited to have you on here because you bring a unique perspective. You perform really high in your uh, but now you're also transferring it to this, right? And like that connection and that transfer across those domains. Um, I'm curious, like, what are you using from what you learned in your pro sports career? Are you that you're applying to your career?
Well, it's funny during my career, and you and I first connected because you had worked with some Major League Baseball players, so you were pretty familiar with some of
Yeah,
the battles that athletes go through, especially baseball players. And so I was at the point in my career, and probably why I took the contract over in Korea was I was going up and down between AAA and the major leagues for 3 or 4 years, and I had a long minor league journey, and so that's pretty demanding on the mind. And I always felt like I was in a rush to get somewhere, and that was the big leagues, right? Like getting there, staying there, establishing yourself, and making a name for yourself, and obviously you're earning the money that everybody aspires to earn, and play at the highest level that you set out to play. And I think if I went back and I played baseball again, or if somebody asked me this recently, and I think it was on my podcast, somebody asked me this question, I thought it was awesome. And they asked me, what would you tell 20-year-old Anthony that was just drafted? And I
right.
think I would tell him to be you, be present, stay in the moment, find gratitude,
Yeah,
enjoy this time. Pro ball went so quick for me. And looking back on it, I felt like I was in it forever and it was taking forever to get to the major leagues. And so that's what I take in entrepreneurship, especially with F45 startup businesses. is enjoying the process. What lessons can I learn from the struggles, the adversity? What lessons can we take from this and then apply it to the next step? We actually had to unfortunately fire our first employee yesterday at F45. And
Yeah.
I asked one of our other employees and somebody who was a manager, and I said, what can we learn from this? Did we give her all the tools to succeed? And she was like, and I was like, I really want you to analyze that. And she said, no, I think I could do better. And I said, okay, we're not mad, but like, let's figure out what that was and let's apply that to the next situation. We don't have to, be in this situation again. So I think little things like that are the nuggets that I'm taking from professional baseball and from sports is, enjoying, trusting the process, being present, and then taking the lessons that you learn from mistakes and then applying it to the future so you don't keep making the same ones.
Yeah, yeah. Regardless of if it's sports, or business, that reflection piece is so huge, right? And we don't spend a lot of time, um, you know, uh, maybe some of us do, but many of us don't, right? Spend a lot of time reflecting on what went well, what could be, what we could do better, right? And so I think that's awesome, right? Like learning from those mistakes, and that's part of pro sports, but obviously business as well. Um,
Right.
the you made me think of one of my professors in grad school talked to us about like what does sports build in us, right? You can either sports can help us build character or character disorders, right? Like we can
Mm,
either develop these really good attributes, or sometimes depending on who our coaches are or what we bring to that experience, we might develop some other habits that aren't as helpful, right? Um, and
right.
so yeah, so what you're telling me reminds me of like you're developing this character that is helping you in this new endeavor, right? Of running a business, right, and
Yeah.
managing people and coaching them up in that perspective. Yeah,
You just took the word right out of my mouth that I was going to use. It's all about the perspective, right? And
right,
it's all about how you perceive something and the way that you look at it after it happened. And these things happen. There's going to be things that are out of our control, on the daily basis. But we are in control of how we respond to them and the perspective that we take, from that moment. And that's where I think over time, especially in the last 2 or 3 years after, with my transition from baseball into the, I guess, quote unquote, real world and business world and
right.
entrepreneurial world, however you want to look at it.
Yeah,
Taking those nuggets that you learn and applying them there is one of the biggest things that's helped me. And I think something that I'm always going to take going forward. And just that power of having the choice of which way you want to look at a situation is so empowering to me. And one of the things that I want to always kind of expand upon, especially with, as I work with younger athletes and younger players. Right now, I'm training a 20-year-old who he's at LSU right now, and he's in a really, really, really good position to be a high draft pick next year. And it reminds me so much of myself when I was in college because I was in the same position to be a
right.
high draft pick. And it's just like the little things that I'm just trying to teach him, or at least just share my experience. I don't even want to call it teaching because it's more of just listen to what I did and I went through the exact same thing. I can relate to everything that you're going through and what little things can I change in your mindset that didn't work for me and then pass that along forward. Hopefully he does that for the next generation of kids that come through LSU, not just LSU, but in pro ball as his career advances, and that's one of the things that I've just taken from all this and understood that it's about a bigger picture and a bigger power, that you can pass that knowledge on to others.
Yeah, yeah. At the start of all that, you mentioned the word choice, right? Like, and I love that, right? That we have a choice in how
Yep.
we're perceiving things, right? It can be
Yep.
difficult, and it's easy to say in some cases, harder to actually implement. And I love that you're on which all those reflection pieces, like what now you have a chance telling it to 20-year-old Anthony, but you're telling it to 20-year-old uh, you know baller, right? That
Next,
could definitely
yeah,
learn from the next generation for sure. I love that.
yeah. And
Um,
sorry, I was just going to say the power of choice. That's one of the things that
you brought
I feel
me. I
like.
know that last part.
What's that?
I didn't know if you had something else there. Um,
No, I'm good. Sorry, I didn't know if we were cutting out. I'm sorry. There we
yeah,
go. I think
no,
we're good.
we're good. Can you hear me okay now?
Yeah, I can hear you. Yep. Sorry about that.
Okay, perfect. Perfect. No, you're good. Yeah, this is happening, right? This is the world we live in, right? We got to flex and adapt and how we choose to look at something, right? Uh, and
Exactly.
so, what I was going to ask, I know that you've gotten into breath work, right? And that's a big passion of mine. Um, Tell me a little bit about what specific type of breath work. Like one of the things that's I was my last episode. I talked to Dr. Arlene Bauer, and we both agreed that if we could teach individuals to do one thing, it would be do some type of mindfulness or breath work type training on a regular basis. If they took nothing else from what we do, it would be something like that, right? But there's so many different kinds, right, out there. There's mindfulness, there's
Absolutely.
meditation, there's relaxation. So, what's something that you've gotten into as it relates to breath work?
I think we might need a couple more episodes if we if we're being honest. But
Yeah.
I originally started. I realized that I think just reading a book, I understood. I was learning about nasal breathing, and that was the first thing that I understood. I was like, man, I don't breathe properly. I don't think. And so I started just diving in a little bit more, and I came across a couple different, Brian McKenzie and a couple different experts and Patrick McEwen, and then I came across Dr. Belisa Branic, and she teaches. Her coin is horizontal breathing and the psychology and biomechanics of breath work, and that just sucked me in because the cues and the thoughts and the thinking about breathing is what real, and like metacognition, that's all about what I enjoy. It was something that I was always into when I was playing, the mind body connection, all these different things. So I was like, okay, I started diving in, and then I started really analyzing my breath as I'm listening to her speak and like reading up on some of her things. I'm like, I'm a vertical breather. All I do is breathe with my shoulders and my neck.
Yeah.
And I was playing professional baseball, and one of the first things that they tell you to do is, hey, we want you to relax before the pitch, and the first thing they tell you, and it's a
Right.
lift of your shoulders and down, and I'm like, that's what they taught us, and I'm like, that is completely wrong.
Right.
That's an
Yeah.
anxiety inducing breath right there. You're telling your body that you're in fight or
Right.
flight in the moment. And when you're trying to pitch in front of 50,000 people and you're taking millions of vertical breaths and anxiety inducing breaths, that makes that experience a lot less fun. So I think I started diving into that, and I was like, this is unbelievable that we don't teach the one percenters, the professional athletes, the proper biomechanics of breathing. And I was wondering how many athletes are clueless about it. So I started doing a little research, and so many guys are just unaware of the benefits of it and how that applies to movement, how that applies to performance, how that applies to your flexibility, your mobility, and then even your muscle strength, and then your endurance, your recovery, all these different things, getting oxygen to your muscles. I was like, there's so much to this. So I took Belisa's course, dove headfirst into it, loved it, got my certification, and now I teach that as a supplement to some of my athletes, and especially when I see that they have mobility issues, because a lot of times when baseball players have hip and glute and thoracic spine mobility issues, it might not be a biomechanics thing. It might be the way that they were taught to breathe, or they were taught to move, or the certain muscles that they're activating. And in the high stress moment of performance, your body's going to revert to the first thing that, or the easiest, the thing that exudes the least amount of energy. And so that was really fascinating to me. And then as I started doing this, I watched my posture start changing. I watched my sympathetic and my parasympathetic nervous system start changing. My heart rate variability start changing, and I just watched my reaction to stress just increase, just the way that I responded to so many things. And I was like, I'm sucked in. I believe it. And then I've always been in big part of the brain and how that relates to performance, even how you think about a movement, which muscles you're activating, which muscles you're using in a certain exercise. And so I really applied the breath work to the muscle mind connection. And it's almost like a 45-minute meditation when you're focusing on your breath work and you're working out, because it's a singular focus the whole time. You're focusing on certain body parts, certain movement patterns, diaphragmatically breathing while you're doing a burpee, or a push up, and creating that pressure in your cavity, like all those different things. It was just so fascinating to me, and I just know it's something that is going to be always something that's going to be a part of my routine. It's always going to be something that I teach the players, and I think it's something that's so overlooked because it's something we do every day, 20,000 times a day, and most of us don't think about it. But as this world starts evolving, right, and we're in this age of social media and immediate satisfaction and gratification, it's so much more important to take those 5, 10, 15 minutes to just focus on your breath work, to be present, to be centered. And I think the biomechanics and the proper breathing mechanics of that, plays such a crucial role in it. And that's why that's the kind of side that I'm into. I'm into the psychology and the biomechanics of it, but I think it applies to so much of how we respond as human beings.
I- you know, Awesome. Great overview. I'm definitely gonna do some of my own research on that because it sounds fascinating, particularly as it relates to performance settings, right? And you talked about using it within a workout. Is there a component to it where you're doing it like more of a meditative type practice, or is it really focused more in that movement kind of setting?
I personally do both. So my newest thing actually is I'll do an F45 workout, and then my goal
Hmm.
is, depending on the range of my heart that my heart rate is in, I try to sit down immediately after the workout and I just watch my heart rate and I try to take the least amount of breaths as possible, while I'm channeling, nasal breathing and oxygen to my muscles, and it's almost like I'm a recovery in the moment. Then I also apply my nasal breathing and my diaphragmatic breathing while I'm actually working out because, like I said, I'm so for the people that are listening and don't know, I'm 6'7". That's a lot of moving parts, and over time, I think I just started overcompensating because I was a good athlete, but I wasn't properly moving. And so I think for me, it becomes meditative during a workout because I'm focusing on my breath work. I'm focusing on my diaphragm. I'm focusing on certain movements while I'm in the workout. I'm not necessarily worried about who's watching or the time on the board or the mirror and how I look. I'm more focused on myself. Is my foot hitting the ground the right way? Am I activating my diaphragm properly so that way my glute is active and my hips and pelvis are in the right alignment? Is my spine in its right position? So it becomes meditative, I think, by practice almost. But I also teach a meditative
Right.
side of it where there's a 5-10 minute recovery after the workout because I think I'm just nerdier and I think I'm into that stuff a little bit more than most guys. So most guys and girls. So I don't want to always encourage
Yeah.
them to be thinking the same way that I do during my workout. But I do implement like a 5 or 10 minute recovery afterwards where they're just focusing on their breath work. And I not spin it. I encourage them to believe that it's oxygen going to their muscles, which is going to aid in their recovery process.
Yeah. 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 And then hopefully that transferability, right? Like, so they're doing it in that way to recover in that domain, and then potentially hopefully they can learn to in other areas of their life, right? Like, say they're just having a stressful day at work, they can do that same breath work, just, in the office or wherever they are. So that's great. The other, as you were talking earlier about all this breath work, you mentioned the HRV, heart rate variability. What do you use to measure? Have you nerded out on HRV and dug into that more?
Yeah, so I'm still learning. I'm still really learning about how it's applicable to everyday living and the stressful environments and which way we can use heart rate variability to quantify certain situations and
Yeah.
resiliency. But I definitely have an Aura ring. I have my Apple Watch that I worry about my heart rate and I focus on my breath work before I go to bed, and then I even watch my heart rate while I'm sleeping and stuff like that. So I definitely pay attention to it. It's something that I'm still learning about. I think it's always going to be a constant learning experience, and I think if you are interested in heart rate variability, I would suggest that you don't compare yourself to somebody else's heart rate variability because it's going to be so individualized to you and your body, your individual stress, how you receive stress, how you process stress, all those different things. So I think it's a continuous learning experience, but I think it's going to be a really cool metric to be able to tell people how resilient they are and how they respond to stress.
Yeah, no, that's great. Yeah, and I appreciate your perspective because there is a lot to learn, and I've seen it used properly, right, as a tool.
Right.
But sometimes it's overused, and many, like that's true for a lot of different things. People
Right.
overuse a tool that was meant for one thing, and they're using it for something else. Like I have my Aura ring as well, right,
Nice.
where I track it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And so for people that don't know heart rate variability, just for everybody listening in, heart rate variability is basically, there's a way I describe it, and I'd love to hear how you, once I give my little spiel, is heart rate variability is the beat by beat representation of the heart rate, right? It's measured in milliseconds. And what we found is if we have higher heart rate variability in general, we tend to be a little more, have a little more flexibility in our nervous system, right? And so as we age, it naturally declines, but sleep is probably the biggest impact on heart rate variability, and then as
Yes.
well as cardiovascular fitness, right? Those are the two big ones. But then all these other things, emotional stress, environmental stress, all have an impact on our heart rate variability. That's I explain it a
I
lot
think
to
that
the
was
people I
perfectly
work
said.
with, but
Yeah.
I'm curious about what how you teach it to somebody, and are you using like that kind of concept with some of the people you're coaching?
Yes, but I think that's a little bit more applicable, and I'm probably going to use that a little bit more in my corporate settings. The
Yeah.
athletes appreciate it, but it's hard because it's so individualized. And some guys, their stress during their workouts are a lot different compared to different people, depending on how hard you push yourself, how much you respond to that. And then, like you said, sleep is such an incredible variable. Some people just get into deep sleep and REM sleep better, and so that way their heart rate variability is going to be higher just naturally, and that's probably because they're more in a parasympathetic state, in waking life. And so that's just
Mhm.
kind of what I teach as more of a holistic basis. I try to tell people to live in the middle part, right? Not too much parasympathetic, not too much sympathetic, and try to live in that middle part. So that way, when you do get
Mhm.
into those high ends, you can bounce back to that middle part and kind of live there. And especially as it applies to athletes, I try to tell people like you push yourself so much that it's really, really important that on everyday living. And one of the things that really gets me is that environmental stress, like, and that's so important and so many people take for granted, right? And that could be so many different things that are even out of our control, right? Depending on where you live, there could be external noise, there could be a lot of light, but depending on if you live in an apartment complex, if you live in an inner city, if you live, in different demographics. So I think it's becoming self-aware and understanding what makes you sympathetic or more parasympathetic, and then adjusting your environment and your stress levels accordingly, but making sure that you get the same recovery, because I think that's such an important part.
Yeah. Yeah. And that middle zone you talk about, I know you and I have had conversations and want to even explore it even further. So I guess we'll take this as our shot here. Is that resilience
I
piece,
like it.
like that word resilience, and how do you define resilience, right? Because that's a popular word in my world that I operate in. I work a lot with the military, and that's a big buzzword, right? And it means a lot of different things to a
Yep.
lot of different people. So what's your take on it?
I think resiliency is how you respond to stress over time. Because I think you can respond to stress in so many different ways in the short term, right? And you might have a great month, or you might have a great couple of days, you might have maybe a year or two. But I think resiliency is a character trait, honestly, and I think that's embedded in you. And I think what I know about the brain, or what I've learned, I should say, what I learned about the brain, neurocircuitry, and different things is you can reprogram your brain and neuroplasticity. You can retrain your mind to be
Mhm.
programmed to have a different perspective in certain situations. And I think it's taken time for me, but I really can confidently say over the last 2 or 3 years that if something bad happens to me, or negative, I think I've shifted my mind that adversity is almost a good thing. I'm comfortable with adversity. That means that there's a lesson to find. There's an opportunity here. Where's the growth? And I think that's the definition of resiliency for me, because I
Yeah.
think that's, like I said, it's a character thing. It's not one time how do you respond to stress. It's not two times. It's not, oh wow, he's had a great month or whatever. It's no, this is how this person responds. He's a resilient human being, because you know what you're
Yeah.
getting from this person on a daily basis, no matter what's thrown at him. There's so many things that are out of our control, but the things that are in our control, to me, that's what resiliency is, how you respond to those things. What
Yeah.
about you?
Yeah. It goes back to
What
that
do you,
word
what do you, what do
choice
you
you
teach,
brought up
especially
earlier.
military? Yeah. Yep. I love it.
Yeah. 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 So, like I break up what I teach in kind of three, sometimes four categories, and they're intertwined, right? So there's a performance element, right? Performance psychology, those are like some skills that you probably have used in your career, of imagery, of self-talk, right? And then within the military, there's a very specific, and particularly the Army and the Air Force as well. Those are the ones I'm the most familiar with. It's called Master Resilience Training, right? And it's a very specific program that came out of University of Pennsylvania. That's the home of positive psychology. Martin Seligman, it was out of there, and so they
Yep.
developed a real specific program going over competencies, right? And some of the competencies are different words that you've said, but you just use different language, right? So self awareness,
Right.
right, is one that you did use, right? Self regulation, the ability to control yourself, right? And then work towards a goal, right? And manage your thoughts and your
Yep.
emotions. But it's about communication. It's about interpersonal relationships, right? So communication. How do you get your message across? How do you avoid biases that just naturally occur, right? And so all those things coming into play is, they talk about, they use an analogy of bouncing back, right? So like a tennis ball, right? Like an egg will break if you drop it on the ground. A tennis ball will bounce back, and so all of that are skills that I teach. One of the things, though, that that I like to kind of add to it is there's pieces to resilience that are genetic, right? Like some of us just deal with stress more effectively, right? Like just our,
Yep.
our gene is part of that. And obviously that's not the part that we teach, but there are psychological components to resilience, right? Like that choice. How do you cognitively reframe? If I'm going to put some of the, psychology terms to it, right? Like how do I
Yeah. Yeah.
make a choice, right? What I'm doing.
Right.
How do I try to fight some of those biases that I have? How do I build stronger connections so that way in good times I can build a solid foundation of people I have. So when I do, have a rough patch, I have people that I can lean on, right? Or how do I, if
Hmm.
in your case you're coaching people, right? And how do I be more mindful of what they're going through so I could be a support system for them, right? And
Yeah.
I would say, the vast majority of us have good intentions when we're trying to interact with people, but sometimes we mess it up, right? And through
Yeah.
communication or
Yeah.
lack of communication, uh, and that all kind of chips away at that resilience piece, right? So, yeah, it's post traumatic growth, right? You talked about enjoying the struggle, enjoying, um, you know, kind of putting yourself in challenging situations and then learning from it. That's a big part of it. I would agree with your definition. Those are just some of the concepts that we go over when we're working with military service members.
I love it. No, that's it. I think resiliency is such a big word in military, so that's why I was curious to see like how you guys taught it, and what kind of stuff you guys focus on. That's awesome.
Yeah, yeah. And so working in baseball, right? And I probably have told you this story before. My first interaction with a baseball player, I was a Latin American mental skills coach, right? So, and you know this,
Right.
right? But listeners might not. Uh, is huge within, particularly in the minor league system, right? It's just there's a lot of
Hmm.
Latin play. I was introduced, and Robert, you're the Spanish speaking sports psychology consultant, and they point me out, and this pitcher like bolts off the mound, comes over, and I'm thinking, cool, I'm gonna get to work with this guy. I'm gonna get to do some sports psychology and teach him some
Yeah.
self talk and some refocusing techniques. And I did, but his chief challenge was that he had gotten into an argument with his girlfriend right before practice, and he was having trouble focusing.
Yep.
So like we worked through some strategies to refocus in the moment while he was in practice, and then I was like, hey, come see me after, and we'll talk about some of these interpersonal skills, right? Like communication. How do you have better conversations with your girlfriend, because they bleed into each other, right? If you want to, you have
Yeah.
to have managed some of the other areas of your life, right? And so, uh, he's a guy I still talk to this day, and because you build those connections, right? And so he knows that I'm part of his
Yeah.
resilience team, right? His resource, right? And so yeah,
Yeah.
they
That's awesome.
as much as we'd like to separate them, there's so much that's intertwined within them, right?
Absolutely.
So so what do you teach your folks about resilience and how to kind of do that consistency, not just one time, but over time, manage themselves in stressful situations? You talked about choice, you talked about perspective. Do you give any like specific strategies to folks?
One of my things, and it's a delicate subject, and I'm still navigating it through it because there's a lot of I work with a lot of younger kids, right? So one of the
Yeah.
things that I've learned is, and it goes back to choice and perspective, right? And it's one of the hardest things to do, and even self-awareness. That I
Yeah.
believe, and this is just my fundamental belief, that anything bad or good, anything can be traced back to a decision, micro, macro, whatever it is, and a lot of micro decisions add up to a macro decision, right? And so most situations that you're in, good, bad, and different, can be traced back to somewhere down the line a decision that you made. And if you exercise mature um, responsibility and self-awareness and accountability, almost, you can look yourself in the mirror and say, hey, look, I had this injury because this, I didn't meet this deadline because of this. And it takes a lot of self-awareness and a lot of humility to be able to really analyze that and say, where did I make my mistakes? How can I better myself? Because most people want to place blame, point fingers, different things. But
Mhm.
if you really, really dig deep, most of the time it falls on you. And most people project different things. And for me, that's one of the things I'm trying to implement into my training with younger players. And for example, I had a young guy throw a bullpen the other day, and it was one of his first bullpens, and he wanted to make a good name for himself. But and it's a lesson that he has to learn, right? Like he stayed up till 12:30 because he was listening to some music and he liked it, and he was talking to his girlfriend or whatever it was, and then he was sluggish that day, and I took some time out of my day and I told him, hey man, like this is your time. You're not you had a responsibility to this bullpen today, and you didn't show up the way that you probably could have. And I'm not going to sit here and say that you did something wrong, but at the same time, I think there's an opportunity to look at what we could do better, and say, hey man, maybe instead of staying up till 12:30 that night, you try to get to bed an hour earlier, and you say, hey, look, I'm going to dedicate this extra hour, maybe to breath work, to focus, to visualization for tomorrow, because I understand what tomorrow is. And then if tomorrow goes right, maybe I'll treat myself and I'll be able to stay up a little later. I'll listen to some music, play some video games, talk to my girlfriend a little longer. But let's compartmentalize things and prioritize things. And when it comes down to it, he didn't have the best bullpen that day. And I said, I think it could be traced back to some things, some choices that you made. And I think over time, if you're just aware of those choices, they become habits, and that becomes your character. And then that becomes your resiliency almost. So I think that's really what I try to teach, but it's a really delicate, fine subject. Maybe you could shine some light on that in ways that I could do it without being so, demanding or
No,
whatever.
I think that's important to be demanding, right? Like I know you're familiar with the concept of fixed and growth mindset, right? And so
Right.
it's one of those other concepts, or in some cases, if you're using the assessment, the tool that gets misused, right? People view fixed mindset. It's just like you have to set these conditions so people can be, uh, so people can be, set conditions so that people can achieve their goals and have like all these positive thoughts, right? From reading Carol Dweck's research, I get the impression, it's about creating standards and then really understanding what your thoughts are that are either impeding you in achieving those standards and goals for yourself,
Oh, I like
or
that.
what
Yeah.
thoughts that you're having that are helping you achieve those goals, right? So like it's both ends of the spectrum, right? And so it's kind of an offshoot, but one of the things we track with some of the military service members is we track their mood states. Every 4 weeks, we check to see how they're feeling, like in different domains, from tension, confusion, right? They're going through a course, so they're looking at these different domains. How much vigor do they have, or motivation, right? How much frustration have they experienced? And sometimes we get back numbers where it's like the last month has been awesome, right? Like they're saying they've been able to perform well. They're not fatigued, So then it's like,
Right.
okay, well now I have this number. What am I going to do with it? That's where it's I reflect the same way you're asking them to reflect when things go wrong, right? Or when they didn't have a success, is reflect on when things went right, and then identify the
Correct.
behaviors, right, that you're talking about that led to that success, so you can replicate it,
I
right?
love
And so
that.
that's and so with the military, going back, you were like, what concepts do they teach? One of the big ones is character strengths, right? So I don't know if you're familiar with the VIA character strengths. Dr. Chris Peterson and Martin Seligman really kind of pioneered that. So University of Michigan and University of Pennsylvania, and the VIA stands for values in action, right? And it's looking at your
Okay.
strengths in action. And so when you can start identifying, since they're all strengths, they're all these good things, how do we leverage those and use those more? So that's a part of resilience as well, and
Oh, I like that.
we have a negativity bias where we're always looking at what's going wrong. Let's spend some time
Right.
also looking at what's going right, right? And so I think there's both sides, but we need to be accountable to both, right? So it's not resting on our laurels. Hey, I have all these good qualities. It's, hey, I didn't meet those standards, and I want to be. If somebody feels bad, I don't shy away from emotion, right? So if somebody like is disappointed, sad, that means you felt something that you're disappointed, you're upset. Leverage that, so you don't again.
I love.
What are you going to do differently, right? So
Yeah. I
if you asked, so that's what I would do, is do both, right? Is what could be done when things aren't going well, but as well as what could be done, when things are going right.
Yeah. No, I love that, and almost like
What
I
what are
call
you?
it. What's that?
Oh, what do you think of that? Of
Oh,
focusing on
I
your
love that,
strengths.
and no, I love that, and I think that's what I'm taking from this, and that's why I was asking is I I'm almost positive to a fault at times, and that's where I think why it's hard for me is because I know that over the last 2 or 3 years, I've ingrained that in my head, right? Like when something bad happens or a challenge, I think I've really like rewired my reward system that I get a flood of dopamine when something negative happens. I'm like, ooh, okay, opportunity, growth, minds, like my mindset's going to be challenged
Yeah.
here. Like, what do we got here? So I always do pick up on the positives, and even a negative is a positive to me. So it's one of those things that I do tell my clients that I actually do. And it's weird because like what you said, I use the phrase live in that. Like, so when something good happens, like
Yeah.
like the kid actually, so right before we jumped in the call, I threw a bullpen with the same kid that on Tuesday had a really bad bullpen, and he had a great bullpen. He was like riding a wave. He was jumping around. I'm like, live in this moment. Feel this. What you just felt, I want you to feel in your brain. I want you to feel it all day. I want you to remember this, and I want you to remember how good it felt, and I want you to remember the steps that you took to get here, and that's going to be able to be repeatable over time. And so I'm so happy that you said that because it makes me feel like I'm on the right track at least.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, and
Yeah.
for somebody that doesn't have like the degree in sports psychology, what you have is the experience gone through it, and then it's being reflective for
Right.
yourself of like what worked for me and what did I do and what again, I love that question that you got asked of like, what would you tell your 20-year-old self? Well,
Right.
these are all the things I would tell them, right? And this is what I've learned over the years, right? And then the hard part is how, right? It's one thing to say this is what I would do.
Yes.
It's how do I do it, or this is what I would like. How do I get there, right? And so those specific strategies are important, right? Like so, I was working with somebody. A friend of mine asked me to help his college daughter. She's was doing online learning, and she was asking for study skills and like how to stay focused, how to remember more information, and then about values and emotion. And I was like, I know you probably were like thinking like I was asking for like how do I get through this text, you know, more quicker and retain more. And I'm sitting here talking to her about values and understanding
Right.
purpose. And it was relevant because I was like, if you aren't living those values, it's going to be hard to sit there and read a subject that you don't like, right? And so you got to know
100%.
what's driving your behavior, right? And so um, even when I'm working on like those specific kind of skills, there's always so much influence from other concepts of values. And I've been curious. I wanted to talk to you a little more about. I know you have one of the other endeavors that I don't know if you mentioned already was the positive vibe movement. We're
Yep.
talking about mental health and things of that nature. How to explain to people what that is and the purpose, because I think it's appropriate. I know this. I don't know if it was this week or last week was Mental Health Week, right? So talk a little
Yeah.
bit about that for us. Yeah.
Absolutely. I'm so happy you asked about that and it's funny because I do feel like, so I'm wearing the hat right now. That's what it stands for, PV.
Right.
And it's one of those things I didn't start. I'm not the founder, but I'm on board with it.
Yeah.
Now I'm an investor in it.
Yeah.
So it is part, it's part of me and my brand and different things, but it was funny. It was actually my podcast. I actually interviewed the founder. I asked him to come down to Baton Rouge and sit on the show because I think I understood his message for about a year or two of just following them. And I felt like I heard his vision, and I knew that he played college baseball. So he flew down here, and we had a great podcast session. And he was just telling me about mental health, and I'm like, dude, I mean, you have great T-shirts and hats, no doubt. But in my opinion, you're a mental health company. You're like that's what
Right.
positive vibes stands for. You're sending good messages. You're sending good mental health. And yes, mental health. May is Mental Health Awareness Month, and so this month we're doing a bunch of different things. And Matt Bonnick is the founder. He moved down to Baton Rouge about 3 months ago, and I think his intentions were to just kind of like partner up and do some marketing stuff and help tell his brand, tell the story and take that step from a t-shirt and hat company to a mental health care company where we are focusing on mental health. And honestly, the mission of the company is to end the stigma around the phrase mental health, because mental
Yeah.
health means so much to so many different people that we need to start having healthy conversations. And the way that the human brain and the human being is evolving is completely different than it was even 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago. So 20 years ago, when you talked about mental health, it was like, oh man, person might need to go, talk to somebody. It was a lot more private. And and especially in sports, it was not talked about. You were looked at almost as weak, right? And it
Yeah.
was funny because when I was drafted, even at 20 years old, when life was going well, I was the highest pick, all these different things. I was still always interested in mental health, and it was never because I was upset, different. I didn't have anxiety at the time. I didn't have the depression. I didn't have the performance anxiety that developed over time. And then I became even more interested in mental health, but I was always interested in mental skills building. And I was always friends with I became friends with our sports psychologist, Bob Tewksbury. And him and I still to this day have a great relationship. I enjoy those conversations. I've always enjoyed human potential and trying to get the most out of people. So him and I always vibed really well in conversations. And when Matt said that he wanted to take the step to the next level and take it to a company that was a mental health care company, I was like, sign me up. Where do I invest? Because
Yeah.
now I get to have a platform to talk about the things that I always wanted to talk about. And I know people look at me in a certain light just because of my physical appearance, and they make assumptions and judgments, but they don't understand what always goes on upstairs in my head. And I know that that's true for so many other people in the world. And I thought that if I could start talking about that and creating comfortable conversations with Matt and with that platform, that we could do some really cool things. And this month alone, we've taken the step where we're selling wristbands now. We have positive vibes journals, which was honestly just started as a gratitude journal type thing, but it's turned
Yeah.
into a great thing where schools are jumping on board with it and everything. And we
Awesome.
hired our first employee and stuff. So the movement is really coming, and it feels like a movement now. In Baton Rouge, he's made some really great connections, just through various different things that we've done together. And it's really fun to watch him come into his own as a boss and really be the CEO of a company now. And
Yeah.
not only watch his sales grow, but watch him develop as a man and as an entrepreneur. And it's just been a fun journey, man. And it's funny to hear so many vast stories because some people think mental health is one thing, and that's why we're having a podcast, because we're going to take so many different people and show their definition of mental health and why it's okay to talk about this stuff and why it's so important to talk about this stuff, especially as our youth evolves, because they've been born and raised on these phones. They've been comparing themselves to everybody's highlight reel their whole lives, and depression and anxiety and so many different things are at the forefront of our healthcare system right now. And I think there's so many different ways, like we talk about physiological or mental or breath, or physical, even just movement, creating BDNF in your brain, can do so many things for your mindset, your mental health. And so that's why, I got on board. It's great t-shirts and hats and stuff like that, but the movement in the company just stands for so much more. And I think it appeals to every walk of life, every demographic, and everybody has their own story. And it's just so interesting to me. And I love connecting with people on that level.
Yeah. I love that message of having those conversations around mental health, because we all have a brain, we all our thoughts and our
Yep.
emotions, right? And we need support, right? We need connections as human beings. We need to interact with other people, and sometimes we limit what we're sharing with people because we're embarrassed, or because we were taught to suck it up, or because that's not what
Exactly.
we should do, right? And um, so I love, yeah, I think the more we talk about it, the more we have these kinds of conversations, the more guys that look like you that have had your experiences talk about it. It does, I think it does really have an impact on the younger generation to realize this is not weak. It's actually a sign of strength to go and have conversation. And so like, I think when one of the definitions of mental health, right, is psychology and counseling, right, and talk therapy,
Correct.
and all the different types of therapies. And that's an appropriate definition of it. But I also think it's just interpersonal connections, how you feel about yourself, right? Like what's your the rest of this whole other conversation that we've had about what you're focusing on, how you're perceiving things, right? That's all mental health as well. And
Yeah.
yeah, I think it's awesome. I always there's one example from the military that always sticks out to me. We're actually covering some of the concepts of resilience, and one of the soldiers raises his hand and he's like, "Why are you putting all these feelings inside of me?" And I was like, "They're already in you, man. Right? Like you,
Yeah, exactly.
you got them. Like I didn't do anything. We're just naming them, right? We're just putting some
That's
labels
it.
on them, so that can help us, right, to understand what we're feeling, and we can talk to people and just." And he's like, "Yeah, but I don't like this." And I was like, "Yeah, it's hard, right? We're not used to it. It's not what our comfort zone is. I get that, but but the more we do it, the more comfortable we get with it. And I appreciate the movement, right, that you're trying to instill with that. And I would imagine you're passing
Yeah.
all that kind of good, positive vibes and to the people you're coaching, right, and trying to help them understand it. Are you different the kids that you're coaching and how they view, maybe these concepts? And some of them may be too young to even have this, but some of them may be in that age where you can have these kinds of conversations. What are you seeing from when you went through this process to what you're seeing now with this younger generation?
I'm seeing an openness that I didn't see when I was coming up. When I was 20 years old
Yeah.
and I first started playing baseball, it was like, don't go say that, don't do this, don't do that. Now I'm talking to 14, 15, 16-year-olds, even the LSU guys that I'm talking about. I actually just the bullpen that I threw, the LSU catcher came up to me after and was like, "Hey man, I'm looking to like take my game to the next level this year. It's my draft year, like, meditation, breath work, nutrition." I'm like, what the hell? Like,
Yeah.
what? Like, I can't
Yeah.
imagine an alpha male saying that 20 years,
Yeah.
10 years ago when I was playing,
Yeah.
And here's this badass catcher guy coming up to me asking these questions. And I'm like, okay, there's something to this. And so to me, the younger generation just has an open ear to it. And like I said, they've had the phones, they've had the YouTube, they've been able to understand what anxiety, depression is. And unfortunately, with bullying, cyberbullying, and depression and suicide, these kids have been exposed to this stuff. So it's not like they're like, totally blindsided, like, oh, this could never happen to me. And especially with the shootings and your school shootings, unfortunately, and all these different things, I think they're well aware of it, and they're okay with talking about it, and they're going to have an open ear because they understand that there's value to it. And to me, mental health, like you said, means so many different things. It can be perspective, mindset. It can be care. It can be so many different things. And I think one of the things that I try to take pride in is having that emotional intelligence of empathy and compassion for my clients, and understanding certain dudes don't want to talk about that. And you have to go at the mental health in a different way, where maybe it's confidence, it's mindset, it's
Mhm.
different things. And then there's the other guys that are going to be okay and be like, bro, I feel so anxious right now. And they're like, okay, cool. I can have a real conversation with you.
Yeah.
You understand your emotions, your feelings, and you're okay with this physiology and this conversation. So I think it's just the willingness and openness to have the conversations that we weren't having a long time ago. And that's why I was like with Matt, I was like, let's put our foot on the gas with this podcast, and let's really create a comfortable conversation and open it up to so many walks of life and see everybody's perspective on it.
Yeah. I know we're kind of coming up on some time. I did have one question, and I'm going to steal the question you were asked, but I'm going to tweak it.
Okay.
Right. So, what would you
Yeah.
tell your younger self? Because I think this is a part of mental health that, particularly athletes, but I think this is true for service members, the folks that I work with. When we transition, and you just went through a transition, right? You went from being a pro athlete and now into being an entrepreneur, and you kind of talked about how you transferred some of those skills. But what could you have done, or would you have liked to have done, that could have set you up for more success, right? Because elite performers tend to really focus in on what they're doing, and they can potentially forget about other areas of their lives, right? Or other interests and things of that nature. And maybe even not for you, but like, is there anything that you could have done, would have liked to have worked on, earlier in your career to set you up for this transition afterwards?
Absolutely. I think the phrase "be you," that would be just something that I would probably have tattooed on me somewhere. But I think the thing that made me so uncomfortable in my own skin and contributed to the performance and even social anxiety over time was when I was in college. I had a certain mindset. I knew why I was having success, even if it was placebo, right? Oh, I'm eating right, I'm sleeping right, I'm doing these things right, I don't drink, I do this, I'm this character. Even if I get made fun of, I used to be the guy that would go to LSU tailgates and I would have the lunchbox full of my turkey sandwich and my snacks while everybody's drinking beer and
Mm-hmm.
tailgating and doing all this stuff. And I was made fun of, and I was like, yeah, but you guys aren't going to be laughing when I'm cashing the checks of being a first rounder,
Yeah.
And I had that mindset. Like, that's just, I was okay with people coming at me and I was just deflecting it. I know my mission. I had my blinders on. When I got to pro ball, I don't know if it was just because maybe I wasn't as confident and I was like, everybody's in the same boat as me. Even though I did feel different, I didn't know if I was. And I think going back, I would have said, Anthony, stick to who you are. Stick with your nutrition plan. Stick with your sleeping plan. Don't feel like you have to drink with the boys, and don't feel like you got to be this cool guy that doesn't work as hard as everybody else. That's what makes you you. go be you and just be comfortable in your own skin, and you're going to have success. And honestly, if people don't mess with you because of that, then they weren't for you. And I think that's the thing, the skill that I didn't have back then, is I wanted everybody to like me, and I wanted to be the cool first rounder that everybody liked. And he was like not pretentious, he was not this, he wasn't that. And I think there's a way that I could have went about it where I wasn't pretentious and I was just confident and secure in who I was, without coming off as pretentious and arrogant or cocky, or this is my way or the highway type thing. And I think that would have allowed me to be a little bit more comfortable in my skin and probably enjoyed pro ball a little bit more. And I think that's what I'm trying to channel with a lot of these younger guys that I'm working with. Is there are going to be people that say stuff to you when you get in the clubhouse. They're going to rag you. They're going to say this, but just understand your mission, what you are and what you stand for. You're only going to be a professional baseball player for a short glimpse of your life. And that's one of the things that I think I would tell myself too, is you're not going to be a baseball player forever. It feels like you are, and it feels like you need to be in the big leagues yesterday, but it's a small glimpse of your life. And just enjoy it, and be present. So
Yeah.
I think those things would have helped me a lot in my transition too, because then I wouldn't have had that clinging on to the identity of a baseball player and a certain person, and I didn't meet my potential, my potential that other people put on me, right? But all that stuff. I think that would have really, really helped me. But at the end of the day, it's lessons that I learned, and hopefully I can pass on to do something better in the world, and maybe somebody else was meant for the things that I thought I was meant for.
Yeah, I think it's an anonymous quote, but it makes me think of, I love that you're bringing this up, because I'm sure there's young kids that are just like, no, I'll do it differently, right? And I'll be able to transition fine, right? They're going to do the same thing you did, and get caught up, because that's the nature of the world we live in. But we don't know, right? We might hit one kid, right, or a few players, or even somebody that's not a professional athlete, and this does resonate with them, right? And they are able to be themselves.
Yep.
And it makes me think of the other conversations we've had, right, about our values, right? Because that's how you stay strong, right? If you know who you are, right, and you know what makes up the the things that matter to you, and identify those things and can learn to live them, it's easier to be yourself, right? It's when we're unsure, uncertain, when those things kind of get away from us, right? And we change,
Yeah.
we chase that shiny object. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think if I could leave the listeners, especially people that aren't professional athletes, and even more so, I think, one of the things that I did learn from I would have been the guy, if I could go back and tell 20 year, I would have been reading on the bus, I would have been reading, I would have been doing different things. I'm a little bit of a nerd. I enjoy that stuff. And I think in pro ball I got caught up in being the cool guy and different things, and like, no, I'll go watch the Netflix with everybody, I'll play the video games, even though that wasn't really me. When I got out of baseball, I started getting back into who I was. I started developing this, performance side of things, the nerdy side of things, the neuroscience, all these things. And a lot of my friends were like, dude, what are you doing? You're 30 years old. Continue to play baseball. Like, because that was their dream. They couldn't feel what I was feeling. And I was like, you know what? This is who I am. This is what I enjoy. Makes me happier every day. So leaving one thing that I could leave things with, doesn't matter if you're a baseball player, if you're an entrepreneur, if you work for the man, if you're a corporate executive, find something that makes you happy, and have your blinders on of the outside sources of what people want you to be, or think you might be, because what they see from you and what they maybe want, they'll have their own, ideas about you, but at the end of the day, you're the one that's got to answer to the man in the mirror. And if you're not happy, then I feel bad, because like you're in control of your happiness and you can choose to do those things. And I went through it. I went through a 7 or 8 year period where I didn't know who I maybe was, and I think that showed on the field. And then even in, like I said, social anxiety and different things like that. So I think I feel more myself than I ever have my whole life. And I'm proud of that. I'm confident in that. And I know where I'm going, my vision and my direction. And if the people, even if they were my close friends, I really do believe that one day they will see it. But if they don't, I'm okay in the short term with them not understanding right
Yeah. 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 You got to go, you can do what you can, right? So I love that.
now.
I think
Yeah.
that's a great place to leave it. But if people want to learn more
Awesome.
about you, about the positive vibe movement, your podcast, where can people
Yep.
find you, and how can they get in touch with you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm on Instagram and Twitter. It's Anthony ANTHONY _Ranaudo, RANAUDO. I kind of post a little bit of everything on there. I talk a lot about performance. I talk a lot about, I have my Open Noon podcast show that you spoke about. And then the positivevibemovement.com is a great website. We just added a blog where we're starting to tell people's story. Like I said, the founder, Matt Bonnick, is an incredible dude. And he just wrote this incredible article about OCD and how he's really coming into his own, and he wants to be an advocate for that and going forward and being himself. And I think that's just a great thing. So I think finding me through those avenues, and like I said, I enjoy connecting with people. So please don't hesitate to reach out. And I'll do my best to get back to all DMs that I get on Instagram. But yeah, shoot them my way, and I would love to connect.
Thank you so much for joining us, for giving us all this great information, and reach out. And definitely, this is Mental Health Awareness Month, right? We got one more week,
Yep.
so go check out.
You get a free journal if you buy
on
something on the Positive Vibe movement too.
Great, and then his podcast is great as well. So thanks again, and we'll see you next week.
Awesome.